Wonderful. Thank you for that, Barry. Good morning to you all. I can do that, that's fine. I can do small things, so. She's being protective of me. I managed to pull strain a muscle and joint this week. So small things are fine to lift, but there were big things I was not doing. So good morning to you all. We are heading into our third sermon, sort of. I said second sermon, third week on Sabbath because the first one was sort of just a really short intro leading into the Connect group time. And I'm seeing some people who are hot, and so I'm going to ask Frank, can we turn the heating off? I think everybody will appreciate that. Yep, we can just press the button. This system, might I add, I reckon it's set to about 13. Just to tell you that the heater in this room, I don't think it knows what the temperature is because it's set to 13. It's definitely hotter than 13. I wanted to add for these little ones, so this for those who might not have been around to hear, only press one. When you press, they're connected. Once it's pressed on one of them, both of them are off. I'm just watching her go from one to the next, backwards and forwards, thinking, this is not going to go well. Once it's off, it's off. Don't press it twice. Okay. They've interconnected. Same in the back rooms. They're connected. Once one's on, both rooms are on. For these little ones, which is where you've been giving, you should see the amount of stuff that we have, but between what you give and others give, and it's wonderful in the community to help families with little ones when they're struggling. 2 more packets went out this week. Through maternal health that Holly, who oversees that for us, delivered to the 2 different maternal health hubs here in Bacchus Marsh region to families that are just beyond struggling. So thank you. Okay, so we've been doing a Sabbath series and asking a number of questions initially and then looking at some of the foundations of Sabbath. And I thought I'd ask a question to begin with. For those who've been on the journey with us so far, how's it going? How's your Sabbath journey going? And this is the thing, isn't it? Kind of just stepping it out. There's over 4 weeks, we're going to cover a bit, and there might be multiple choose-your-own adventures that you're intending to want to do some of, but they're not all going to happen at once. I don't know about you. I reckon we're going to continue as a couple, Pete and I, to be out working these for months. But we did institute one. Again, we talked after the last one, so we told you what we had looked at before and that I've been on this journey for a while, but how we're doing this together as a couple. And one of those was at this time when we begin on a Saturday night for Pete, the fact that I said I begin sort of Sunday afternoon because this is my usual work. So we do Saturday night together, but I begin from Sunday afternoon so we can do it together. But we went, let's have a meal together, and over that meal, we often have a meal together, but let's be intentional about that not being like it's the weekend, let's sit and watch TV whilst we do it. No, let's sit and have a meal together and converse and do what are we thankful for this week, and offer a prayer at the beginning of our Sabbath. So we did that yesterday. Of course, poor Peter's Sabbath is done now. He got a call at 11 o'clock last night that he has to head out to Colac today, so the reason he's not here is because he's working. You got to do what you got to do. So it was a very short Sabbath for him, but God honours these things. Maybe you want to just chat to the person next to you on what you've been finding the journey to be so far, or your thoughts around Sabbath and Sabbath rhythm. Just take a couple of minutes. Lovely. I'd encourage you to keep those conversations going. Chat with other people, see how they're instigating things, what their thoughts are on things. Remembering that in all of this, it's an invitation. We don't have expectation around this, but there's still a beauty in what God has originally created, which is what we talked about last week. We began and we said we were going to start with the foundation of the 2 times that are before it's even a commandment, that is a part of lifestyle. The first one being that we looked at Genesis 2 last week, and we looked at how God was a part. God is the one who did the first Sabbath, and God doesn't get exhausted. So it can't be about recovery. It's about a rest that is about enjoyment. And we referenced the idea of pray and play components. Talk about a tongue twister. The pray and play components. And the holy, it was the first thing to be called holy. And so we both Sabbath as worship, which is our pray, and Sabbath as a rhythm for life, how it's wired into society. And that the problem is if we only do that pray side, which is probably what a lot of us who are old enough to have lived under some more rigid approach to Sabbath, experienced that legalistic, almost pharisaical approach. Because we've taken out the side that's play. And that if it's only play, then it's what Eugene Peterson termed a bastard Sabbath. It's just another day off. It's lost its reference to God and being something set apart for him. With that as that foundation, I said there were 2. So there's a second reference that happens even before we are looking at it being in the 10 Commandments. Now, obviously, I did mention one of those commandments last week because the first time that it's given in the 10 Commandments, it references, for God rested on the 7th day and called it holy. Made a commandment based on an overall rhythm and principle. But the second time it occurs, before we are even entering into 10 Commandments being given, is in Exodus 16. Now, I didn't word Caleb up, so if he's up, though, for having Exodus, beautiful. And also the verses, they might like to read along unless they've got that in their Bibles. I'm going to read it in a moment. But let me set the scene for those who may not know, or sometimes it's just good for us to be reminded. Because this is set right after Israel's exodus from Jerusalem. Not quite, from Egypt, where they've been in bondage or in slavery. If you recall, or maybe you don't know, but Joseph, hundreds of years earlier, has ended up in Egypt and has rescued not only the Egyptians through dreams that God gave that say that there was going to be a famine, but his own family. And when that's all resolved, that family and all the maidservants and all the kids to come settled in Egypt by invitation of Pharaoh, in a sort of honoured relationship. The problem is that as time goes by, people forget the foundation. What they see is just this Jewish family, this family that is God's chosen family, has become a nation, a people, and all they see is they're multiplying over and over again. And so now there's a Pharaoh who is afraid of the number that there is and the potential. He operates out of fear and not out of peace and love. And with this new Pharaohs, many, many Pharaohs later, he puts them into a slavery. He subjugates them and makes them slaves who will build all the temples. Yes, temples and whatever that word is, and the pyramids and all those things. So we talk about the great Egyptian era built on the backs of slaves and the Israelites. And so now God sent Moses, a type for Jesus, and freed them. And they are on their way through. And keeping in mind the type of things that they've not just lived the hundreds of years of slavery building these buildings, but actually in more recent times, as Moses has said, let God's people go, the reaction has been not just to have to produce bricks, but to now produce them without straw. To have to collect the straw themselves and still keep up the quota they always had. That when things go wrong, this is what Pharaoh declares over them. Lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That's why you keep saying, let's go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. It's gotten worse before it's gotten better. But now they're free. Free, I tell you, free. I want to go, it's free at last, but I can't think of the rest of the song. There's been this favor of God on them because the Egyptians, as they've left, have given them gold and given them silver and given them all sorts of resources. My goodness, could you imagine being slaves who were just getting by, and there'd be varying degrees of getting by, but they're all slaves, to now given stuff as they leave. And God's been guiding them by a pillar and a cloud and a fire. And then when they're feeling like they're trapped, they've encountered the Red Sea parting. And not just parting, but when it comes back, it's killed Pharaoh and the Egyptians who've come after them. This is where they are now. And then we find ourselves at Exodus 16. Keeping that as the background in mind. We begin at the beginning of the chapter. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin. There's a name if ever I heard one. Who wants to reside in the desert of Sin? Which was between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month after they have come out of Egypt. How long have they been on this journey of freedom with God? Month and a half. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to themselves, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Talk about whitewashing a slavery experience. But before we're prone to thinking, those stupid Israelites, I wonder how often we whitewash something God's taken us out of, because it was what we knew, so it was comfortable, even if it wasn't wonderful. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see if they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are you that you should grumble against us? Do you love how Moses has aligned himself to God here? It's not just, you're doing it to me too. Moses said aloud, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked towards the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. They've had a month and a half of knowing what this cloud means. God is here. Then the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes of frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is this? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little, and when they measured it by the omer, the one who had gathered much did not have too much, and the one who had gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they had needed. Can I just go, let alone bread miracle? Miracle right there. Grab what you think. Some were greedy and grabbed more, but it was still God had orchestrated what they needed. Some felt like they couldn't do enough, and it was still what they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of this until morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. I kind of get that. When you've had to scrimp and save and you're not sure and you've been without and you're like, how many of us just want to go, I'm going to put a bit away. I've learned from that experience, yeah? But they kept part of it until morning. But it was full of maggots and began to smell in one day. Second miracle. Third miracle in all of this? I don't know. So Moses was angry with them. Every morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning." So they saved it until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. Miracle number 4. "Eat it today," said Moses, "because today is the Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Now, where have they even heard of Sabbath up until this point? The only encounter they have had with Sabbath is the creation story that has been passed down. At no point have they been asked to do so, commanded to do so, but God is up to something here. And of course, here's what happens next. Nevertheless, some people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days." Gives you the Sabbath. God's gift to them. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. So the people rested on the 7th day. And it goes on to say that they called that bread-like substance manna, and that what it tasted like coriander seeds and wafers made with honey. My goodness. Not even having to do a recipe and you end up with multiple tastes. And so it goes on what they were to do. First occasion where the Israelites are commanded to celebrate Sabbath. I think it's amazing to think that they wanted to go back to start with. So why does God institute this approach to food? What's really going on here? Because sure, part of it's about making sure they survive with food because they're in a desert and the ability to produce is limited and they're nomads at the moment. But more is going on in this awesome story where God spends 40 years feeding them. Now, mums, dads, whoever's the one who's cooking, just remind your kids of this story if they're ever like, "I can't do this meal, not again," because this million or so people of God ate the same thing day in, day out for 40 years. Whoa. That's good for anybody who likes consistency, but for the rest of us, that sounds a little bit like hell to me. But anyway. But what is going on? Here is God saying, I recognize these people were slaves. And what slavery does is say, I've got to keep working to earn it. I got to keep going. I got to keep producing. I've been made to. And they don't know how to rest in trust in God. And so he's literally hardwiring the change into them. Not a choice you can choose to stop or not, but there's no way you will have food because it'll spoil if you keep it. Except on the one day you're not supposed to collect it and then it'll keep. He's saying this rest is so key to the idea of finding freedom that I'm going to create a Sabbath practice they all had to live with in order to find that Sabbath rhythm, in order to find that Sabbath rest and worship lifestyle that we talked about before, that work for 6 and rest for 1. And it's not yet in a commandment. Now, it is a command from him in this moment, but it's not something that has been instituted as a remind yourself consistently of. It's his way of reminding them that they are free and they are his. I'm going to ask just a second, because if I don't have a clock, you're all going to be in trouble. My phone's sitting right there. If I put it on this stand, then I can check often enough and you all won't be stuck here forever. Yeah? Because I love this stuff. So you might be if I don't keep a check. All right. So he's rewiring their behavior and saying, I am God's, getting them to say, I am God's and I trust him to supply all my needs. I am not a slave and we are all equal before God. What the command goes on to say, the one that's given in Deuteronomy, which is now given at the end of 40 years of this practice of experience. It's given to a new generation who didn't live as slaves 40 years later, except for those who might have been kids who are now adults, or a few who were in their 30s or 40s who were old and might remember. But the large majority never lived as slaves. But he knew when they went into a land where they would now work the land, they might forget. And so the second commandment has one change. You know, all those 10 commandments are almost word for word the same between the two versions, except for one commandment, this one, the Sabbath one. Now instead of saying remember, it says observe. In Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 to 15, it says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your sons or daughters, nor your male or female servants. So even those who are not slaves, your servants who work for you. Nor any foreigner residing in your town. So even the people who might not be following your ways, even if it's not their faith, everybody is on an equal footing. So your male and female servants may rest as you do. Now that is the same, except for the word observe instead of remember. Here's where it's different. It says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Remember, you were slaves, but you are not slaves anymore. So you will not live like slaves. You will live like people who are God's, who can trust God for him to provide and take a 1 day in 7 rest and honor him. That's the link. But this occurs beforehand. In fact, these Israelites became known as Sabbath people. What marked them as different? Because sure, we know about the Abrahamic covenant, and without going into details, we know what was done to the male son at 8 days old to mark them. But there's no one going around checking, wait, are you a Jew? Show me. It's not visible to the world that that's the mark. What was visible that was different? The Sabbath day. It's actually one of the indictments against them that led to being taken into captivity, because they were not living God's way. And how did they find? One of the marks was a Sabbath, because I think a Sabbath brings us back to God and his way of thinking. And so therefore all our actions follow through. In Isaiah 58, you'll find that where it's talking about that they fast, but why isn't God doing anything? Well, because it's just a hypocritical fast. Because where's the freedom of oppression for others? Where's the caring for the people who are broken? And where's the observing of the Sabbath lifestyle where you worship me? That's the indictment. Come back to those things. Come back to that lifestyle. Barton, Ruth Haley Barton, who I read some of to you last week in her book on embracing the rhythms of work and rest, she says that the Sabbath was the sign, symbol, and lived reality of their resistance to and their liberation from oppression. This week, we talk about Sabbath as liberation, or Sabbath as freedom. Sabbath is an invitation to trust God. That's the history of it, but what about now? So if that's why it's instituted, let me ask you, are we slaves? Are we free to choose? Would you say you are in bondage? Contemplate that for a second whilst I read you the beginning of this article that comes from, it's 2021. Lisa Cho ignored the first symptoms. After all, the 53-year-old business analyst was a very active, fit vegetarian who cycled frequently and avoided high-fat foods. She was far from the typical victim of a heart attack. However, the Seattle-based Choi was working 60-hour work weeks, including evenings and weekends. She was facing tight deadlines and managing complex digital projects. This workload was utterly normal for her. I have a really high-stress job. I'm usually on overdrive, she says. It wasn't until several months ago when she suddenly started feeling an anvil-like pressure on her chest that she began to take her symptoms more seriously. In the hospital, it turned out that she had a tear in her artery. This is a hallmark of a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, or SCAD, a relatively rare heart condition that particularly affects women and people younger than 50. Told that she would need an angioplasty to open up her artery, Cho thought, I don't have time for this. I'm scheduled for migrations at work and I'm doing all this stuff. Like Choi, many are also finding themselves in ill health due to intense work schedules. New, sobering research, said to be the first ever study to quantify the global burdens of disease from working long hours, has shown how bleak the situation is. In a paper published the 17th of May, that'll be 2021, authors from institutions including the World Health Organization and the International Labour Organization suggest that each year 750,000 people, contemplate that a second, 750,000 people are dying from ischemic heart disease and stroke due to working long hours. Ischemic heart disease, also known as coronary heart disease, involves a narrowing of arteries. Choice SCAD is different from the conventional, but the stress and the high blood pressure are major factors in both. In other words, more people are dying of overwork than malaria. This is a global health crisis, demanding attention from individuals, companies, and governments alike, and if we don't solve it, the problem may not only continue, it could get worse. In an article titled How Overwork is Literally Killing Us. They go on to list the two major ways that overwork can reduce health and longevity. One is on the biological toll of stress. It'll uptick your hormones. It'll lead to increased blood pressure and cholesterol. But then there's also the behavioural changes. That logging long hours means that you might sleep less, that you're not exercising as much, and you're more inclined to obviously eat not as well. Scary statistics from a global study, yeah, based on the 60-plus work hours. The statistics say that after 55 hours of work, I think I said this last week, but I'm going to say it again because it's valuable. After 55 hours of work a week, your productivity isn't any better than those who do less than that. That it tends to drop. Yeah? We keep thinking, but I've got to get it finished. If you're waiting to rest when you've finished everything, you'll never rest. And it's literally killing us as we are slaves to, that's just paid work. That's just the job work. We have other work that we have to do, that we spend our weekends trying to catch up on our nights. And if it wasn't the world alone that's setting this for us and informing and enculturating us to the fact that we are to work, So is our Protestant faith background. Article, I knew this already, but the article actually referenced, that one or one of the other ones I've got referenced, our Protestant roots being part of the problem. And then it going on to be the Industrial Revolution and all those things creating a culture that is now the sea we swim in. We are slaves to our society's expectations and our own, with a natural wiring towards overwork. But it started with a view that Martin Luther, in wanting to emphasize that it isn't only those who are priests who are called to God's work. So it came from a great foundational thought. Became warped to become, if we're not working, are we serving? Are we making a difference? Why do we buy into the cult of overwork? Because its roots are in this Protestant work ethic that it's the quest to live virtuously. Now, I think we all know this. I don't think I'm probably really saying anything that's a surprise, but maybe it's easy to think that's the overall society's view, but am I really caught in it? I'm free to choose, aren't I? But let me ask you, how was your week? If you answered, what would it reveal? Because the most often answers we're inclined to give are things like, I'm overwhelmed. Oh my goodness, I'm busy. I just can't keep up with everything I've got to do. Sometimes, sadly, with a little bit of a martyr's pride. It's almost the approved sin to be busy. The look at how good I'm doing life because people want me so much. Let me ask you, do you feel guilty when you're seemingly idle? Do you find it hard to stop because you have to contribute? This one was challenging for me when I got married a couple of years ago. Can you rest when another person in the home is working? Or do you feel bad? It's taken me 3.5 years to get most of the time okay with that one, yeah? Maybe we're more slaves than we think, and maybe Sabbath for us is an invitation to trust God. And I get that for some, we can do that without any concern on whether we'll have enough. But for others, there quite possibly is but will I even have enough? But God said he would supply all our needs according to his riches in glory. He said to not worry about what we will eat or drink in Matthew 6. There's a story. Which one did I bring it with me? Yes. There is an organization in America, in New York City, called B&H Photo. It's the largest photo and video equipment store in the United States, and it is Jewish owned. It's the largest. And you know what? Come their Sabbath, Friday night at sundown, all the stores close. And they stay closed on the busiest shopping day of the week. Not only do they close their stores, they close their online store, and you cannot buy anything from Friday, even though that would be automated, because it's freedom for all according to that commandment. They shut it all down, and yet they are the biggest store in America. I don't know how God will provide for you, but who are we going to trust, ourselves or God? Sabbath as liberation is our invitation. How beautiful that is. We are free people, free in God. And I'd say, what about the bondage to tech? Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not giving up my tech anytime soon. I will keep my phone. I am happy to watch my TV. I like that I can do my work on my computer. And I'm very happy with all the different things that my phone can give me access to. But I don't want it ruling my life. One of the most challenging things I did on sabbatical for the 8 weeks that I had earlier this year was I knew I wanted off. So that it seemingly was easy. I deleted Facebook from my phone. I deleted all socials from my phone. I shut down notifications for emails and WhatsApps and messengers. So surely that means it'd be easier to just leave it sitting there, yeah? For the first I realised how often when I'm sitting in front of the TV or how often that phone is picked up. Pick it up. No. Pick it up. No. And then I moved to games. And for the first couple of weeks, instead of socials, it was games. I went, wait. This is the same problem. And I put it down. By the time I finished my sabbatical, I no longer checked it all the time. I actually could have it and I forget where I put it. That's still regularly a problem at the moment. Do you sleep with it beside you? That's for the phone. For some, it might not be the phone in your generation. It might be the TV, or it might be video games, or it might be music. The degree can be huge for us. What might it be to have just one day where we come off it? One day, or even half a day if you'd prefer, where there's no tech at all for the entire week. Can you do it? Sabbath as freedom. Sabbath as liberation. But here's the thing, it isn't the only thing the Israelites gained from that manna experience. The other part of Sabbath and that practice was also that it set them as God's people. It was identity. Sabbath as identity. Now, I want to be clear. Our identity is not in Sabbath, making us known as God's people. Jesus did that for us. Jesus is our identity. But what might it mean for us? What might it change in ourselves if our identity was not in the things we do? Consider the conversations that you have when you first have a conversation. You say, hi, and I go, hi, I'm Raelle. And what do you do, Mel? What do you do, Frank? What do you do, Di? And our first answer, on instinct, is usually our occupation. Now, I don't think it's because we necessarily in our heads value our occupation more. I think it's become what we easily answer. Because it's much harder to think about how else I might answer that question. It's our wiring of society to answer that way. But here's the thing I know. What we discuss is what we end up valuing. So even if it's not where we started, the fact is that by answering that way, we're wiring ourselves to want to have something to say. So is it the chicken or the egg that came first? I don't know. It doesn't matter. This is where we are. Our identity grounded in what we do. Marva Dawn in her book Celebrating Sabbath Wholly, as in WHOLLY, says, do you need to reach a certain level of accomplishment in order to feel like a worthwhile person? Then we've got a problem, people. But here, isn't that the beautiful invitation available to us? That our identity is no longer as a slave to what we do. That our identity is now not even a slave to Jesus. Because Jesus was clear in John 15:15 that I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. We are his friends. That's huge. So we get to celebrate Sabbath to realign our identity back to him. Because in the same way that God knew for 40 years he had to not allow them to have the extra food, he knows we need a regular coming back to a reminder that our identity is first as God's children. First as his and dependent on him. First as his friends. Richard Rohr says, we have no real access to who we are really except in God. And when we rest in God, we can find the safety, spaciousness, and the scary freedom to be who we are, all that we are, more than we are, and less than we are. We have before us the chance to keep our identity day in, day out settled in God. And Sabbath is one way to do that. Sabbath as identity and Sabbath as freedom. So we have our choose your own adventures for this week. And I want to say, remember all of this, information's great, but what we're looking for is transformation. And that can be in baby steps. So I'm going to mention a variety of things. All of them are take one element of, and no one's expecting you to do all of them. What's the invitation God has for you that you might experience his freedom afresh? And what's the invitation from God that you might experience a reminder of your identity in him? They're the gifts that come out of these scriptures. The choice is really yours, but I can tell you there is joy to be found on the other side. I think Exodus 16 miracles are available to us all. So the first one, there's this, if we were to talk about some of those things now, you might say, well, where are you most tired? If I was to ask you that question, is it emotionally, physically, mentally? Where's that strongest resistance to the idea of Sabbath? See, sometimes what it brings up is something that's got to be worked through that's hard. But it's the other side of that brings healing and wholeness. So maybe there's some resistance. And one of the things that from practicing the way, is I think the first exercise that will be on the screen, is to pick 1 to 3 of the cultural forces that pull us to slavery that you would choose not to do on the Sabbath. The ones listed there, phone and social media, the internet, TV and entertainment. Obvious ones, we talk tech. But what about shopping? It might not be this is about what is for you the right thing. What for you feel God is saying will actually pull you to a different focus. Shopping can be one, it keeps others bound to working on the Sabbath. But that's one side of it. The other side is that in spending, you've then got to earn. In the constant need to accumulate in our own strength or to forget God in the process. But that might not be for you, and if it's not, then don't choose that one. Social obligations. I could do sport, but honestly, I can tell you I don't do sport now, so what would that bring as a change? Yeah? Weekend work, chores, errands, people. The choice is yours. Maybe that's your choose your own adventure for this week. Reminding us that we're just picking something we might move forward in. Maybe for you it needs to be an entire digital Sabbath. So that's our second option. If we go to the next one. And in this case it might be choose a full 24 hours or at least a good portion of the Sabbath if it's too much to do this. Now, my husband can't actually do this entirely. His work requires that it is on and will ring out loud. But what he can choose to do is put it somewhere and not touch it in that time, except if the call happens. Where I can put it in a box and put it away. But we'd recommend that you do, where you can, literally put it out of sight so it's in time, out of mind. Now, a warning, this might be really hard to do initially. There might actually, I told you, the amount of times that I'll sometimes go, did it ring? I heard it vibrate, because I keep it on silent most of the time. That phantom phone vibration. But here's the thing, if we stick with it, what might it do for creating a sense of peace and God's presence for us on the Sabbath day? Keep in mind, I want to say again, just the Sabbath day. I'm all for tech, but let's make sure we control it and not it controls us. Or maybe that's too big a step. Ruth Haley Barton in her book suggests a step before that when it comes to phone control. Maybe you just do a bit of an audit on where you're actually at with how it controls you. And so on this next one, she suggests, why don't you try going for a walk with your phone and without your phone and see what difference it makes? Or have your phone with you over lunch and don't have it, leave it in the car, whether it's with a friend or a spouse. Or that you might sleep with it in your room and then not sleep with it in your room. That's for the phone. Or that when it comes to even, say, the TV, I don't know if you get dressed and have it on the moment you get up. But if you do, what if you tried doing that or not doing that? Or when you're in the car, do you always have to have music or a book or a podcast? What might it be to try that and then not have that? And just do an audit and see what happens. No commitment to doing it more so. Just explore. My final suggestion is a Sabbath box. Jewish people, Orthodox Jewish people who celebrate Sabbath in this way, apart from all the things we've mentioned in the previous weeks, like lighting candles and having a meal together, thankfulness and a particular routine that reminds them of God in the midst of that, will also have what they call a Sabbath box, where they put away devices, maybe wallets, maybe some work things that they put away to say for the entire Sabbath time it's in this box and it's not touched. Maybe you're a tangible person where the physical box is this reminder and a part of a step. So remember we talked about last week, the habit of wiring ourselves to know the same way that when I brush my teeth and I go to the toilet, my body knows it's bedtime and knows how to head to sleep easier. Yours might then include the option of actually writing down any unfinished tasks, any sorrows or any fears that are sitting with you that you can put in the box and put aside to just as a representation of putting them down, not carrying those burdens as you move into the week. I don't know what yours will be. And I get that in some ways hearing some of those, for me, hearing that 750,000 people every year are dying from issues that are caused by overwork is a scary statistic. Yeah? More than malaria. But I don't think it's about the scary side. I think it's about the wonderful side of what God has created that circumvents that. A holy, set-apart day where we can play and pray, where we can not be tied to work and say, actually, those demands, they're there, but I choose not to be in bondage to them, and I choose to trust God, and for one day a week I can stop. And my productivity will actually increase. And God will do amazing things, maybe not the same way as that photo and whatever it was called, equipment store in New York. But time and time again, already now I've said to you, I've done Sabbath quite consistently in the past, and I lost it for a time. For me, it was some of the, not Peter's fault, just a new rhythm when you get married. It takes time, yeah? New home, someone around to see. I was used to doing this all on my own. And a new job. Finding space to do that, and I found that again. And can I tell you, even as doing this series, when I was already doing it regularly, my productivity during the week has improved. My focus, because I know come Sunday, I can stop. So if that's where my good rest is going to happen, then my good work can happen during the week, rather than I'm feeling weighed down by this, when is this ever going to end? Now, I don't know how you make that work for you, and remember, we take baby steps. If for you, that's starting with just 2 hours consistently during the week, hey, nobody runs a marathon by just going, I'm ready to run a marathon. They start by running a couple of 100 meters. What invitation does God have for you? I wonder if I'm going to ask the guys to come up. I would love us to end by singing Make Room again, because I think that those words alone are an invitation for us to say, God, show me how you would have me do this. Show me. I'm just trying to find the last part of there it is. I have a prayer I would like to read out too in the process that Ruth Haley Barton has done. Or some words to speak over you, and then as we pray. Sabbath is an opportunity to find ourselves in God again. Sabbath restores us to a sense of our truest identity as God speaks into our souls and whispers to each and every one of us. Here's the words he says to us. Remember. Remember who you are. You are precious in my sight and I love you. Remember who I am and that you belong to me. I have redeemed you for my purposes. I have called you by name, you are mine. Remember what I have done in liberating you from your bondage. And remember that I have the power to do it again. I can and I will. And in fact, I am already doing it.